When's the right time to present a proposal? Or what about a full-blown presentation? When do you walk your prospect through your ideas, your process, and your pricing? If you're asking that question, you're not alone, and that's probably why you're here. A lot of salespeople think if I just show them something that's kind of impressive and really cool, they'll say yes. Razzle dazzle. That's what I do. And then all of a sudden they say yes. But guess what? If you haven't uncovered the real pain or real sense of urgency or understanding what their budget is and a whole process of how they make decisions, your proposal's going to fall on deaf ears, or better yet, you're going to fall on deaf ears because you're not going to hear back from them. In this episode, we're going to walk you through exactly when you should present, what needs to happen first, a few red flags of, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this quite yet. And we're also going to talk about a compare and contrast kind of a story here that I had with a client that I was helping get the sale. And we closed this deal, pretty big deal, in a couple of days. And it just took that for a variety of reasons, but it only took that for the size project. This was actually a pretty good deal. Let's get started.
This is the Slow Pitch Podcast.
So let's talk a little bit about when you should be giving a presentation or doing a proposal. And my answer to that, and you may have heard me say once before, and that is you really almost never should be doing that. You should almost be doing that as an afterthought. It should be coming way at the end of a long process. And by long process, I mean relatively speaking. So if your sales cycle is a one day, one and done kind of conversation, you should have maybe an hour-long conversation and then a 5-minute, here's the presentation. That's really it. So relate that to if this is a 6-month process, then your final presentation should be about 15 to 20 minutes of presenting information. And I say presenting in a loose way. I'll share with you here in a minute what I mean by that. Let's dig into a little bit of an example. So I have a client that I was working with who wants to have a big project that came in, and she was thinking, hey, this is a good project. I want this project. And we had to kind of set some mindsets there, because in the beginning, if you want something really, really bad, it can come across the wrong way. So let's take that idea out of your head, and let's first start with the idea of you don't have the job yet. You may not get the job. And guess what? You probably may never get the job. And if you don't, you're going to be okay. All right, so let's start from that. It's a matter of you have the right mindset walking in. That's the first key. The job was this. She had a lead that came in. It was a private school. They needed to switch their vendor. Her company does HVAC, or heating, air conditioning, those types of things. So she was in South Florida, and so air conditioning is pretty important. You don't want to live there without an air conditioner most of the time throughout the year. This private school called her and said, hey, we have a need to switch our vendor. We're having some problems, and we would like to switch the vendor out. And so to me, that was the first little red flag. You want to switch the vendor out, huh? How come? So before we had the meeting with this private school, and I say we, meaning I'm kind of helping her, so I'm behind the scenes, but really what happens is we had to go through a series of questions of, why are they searching for this? What is the issue that's going on, and why are they working on trying to find a vendor? Well, come to find out, she was handed another company's proposal when she met with them. And I thought that was even more telling, that this poor guy who went there, it sounds like went to look at this system that they were running into problems with, and went through a whole bunch of stuff and just wrote it all out, gave a price and said, here you go. And also in this particular estimate, which was nice for him to share this, is they said something in there that was like, hey, we're the best. We've worked for this many years. We've done all these things, blah, blah, blah. And it's really nice that they do all that. But, that means nothing if you don't earn their trust ahead of time, right? When my client, Amanda, we decided we're going to go into this thing, and we've been handed this, there's a little bit of a different approach here, right? So, and this should be the same approach, but now we have some inside information that we wouldn't have access to normally. The issue really was that this school has a air conditioning unit, compressor's kind of old and about to die. It's a 12-ton unit, doesn't mean anything other than it's old and it needs to get replaced pretty soon, because if they don't replace it before the beginning of the new school year, it may become an issue. Layer onto that, they also have, and we find out later, that their budget resets soon over the summer. And so they want to spend that money now rather than later. That's the way that they wanted to do it. So this other company had put in a warranty, maintenance plans, all this other stuff. That's nice. But we felt like, what if we don't need all that stuff? So Amanda, when she went, she took a little look around, and she shows up, they walk her through, they show her the unit. She looks around, does some investigating and says, so tell me again, why do you think you need a new unit? And that was a little bit jarring to them. She said they were like, what do you mean, why do we think? This is what we were told. And she says, well, okay, but why, what seems to be the problem? It's still working, isn't it? And they said, well, okay, yes, but it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't get as cold as it used to. It takes forever for things to cool down. So then she says, well, when did you start to figure out that you didn't need a new unit? And they start answering those questions. And then she says, well, what happens if you just don't fix it right now? I mean, you've got a new school year, you got a new budget. Why wouldn't you just do that then? And so she goes through all these questions and finds out, well, students are complaining already this time of year. Schools are not out yet. And, there's an event coming up. Parents are going to be there. They don't want a chance that this thing's going to be down. And so she's like, have you had any events since it went down or started going down at all? Have you had any events since then? Or they said, no, we haven't had any, but we're afraid that's going to go down before this event comes up. And she's like, okay. And she's like, well, you have a vendor already, don't you? Why wouldn't you just call them? Why are you calling me? And they said, yeah, but they're the reason this thing's going down. They haven't really fixed it. They haven't maintained it. They said they would maintain it. They haven't come out as often as they used to, or they should. And we're not happy about it. She's like, oh, that's not good. Well, have you called them to at least come out and check on it? Maybe they just didn't even know that this was bad. Maybe you should call them. And they're like, no, we don't want to work with them anymore. And they gave her a bunch of reasons why they didn't want to. One is that they took forever to get there. And so that was an interesting thing too. If it took forever for that company to get over there, why did that take so long? Is it because they're busy? Is it because they were a difficult client? They just want to deal with them? So she starts digging into some of those questions. The point is, she started asking a whole bunch of questions about that vendor, but it was just a conversation. It was very comfortable. They were answering the questions freely because they didn't feel like they were being sold. They didn't feel like they needed to protect themselves, but she was gaining so much information. And then she turns to them and says, you know what, these units, they're not inexpensive. Have you guys set aside funds for stuff like this happening? Because this can happen occasionally, I'm sure. And they said, yeah, we do. We have a budget. This is kind of part of the deal. We knew that some of the maintenance stuff needs to happen, and this could be one of those items. She said, and what did you guys set aside for something like this? This is kind of a big deal. They said, yeah, it is. But we've set us out, and then they told her how much they set aside, and she was happy to hear that number because it fit with what it would take to get that done. And then she said, what if I told you that might be a little bit more than that? What would happen then? Now, that was an interesting question, right? They told her the budget. She felt like that's an okay budget to be able to repair it. But if she says, well, what if I told you it might be a little bit more than that? What was their answer? Their answer was, it would be okay because we have funds that we can move around from this area to this area. We're going to be okay with that. So she knew that number that they said originally is pretty good. That's probably going to be okay. That's something that's really interesting and helpful to know, isn't it? That they could pull money from another account if they needed to. So she says, all right, well, should we start to talk some budget? Would that make sense? And so they said, yeah, let's do that. So she starts kind of digging through and figuring out what that would look like. And then she says somewhere in the conversation, would it make sense for us to put a few options together for you and figure out what's the right option for you guys? Knowing she thought she could probably give them a couple of options to choose from, which could involve other things along the way over the years that come. But it would be helpful for them as options. So she talked about the different options and kind of let them select which ones they thought they would like to see pricing on, all knowing that was all within their budget that they talked about. So let's talk about what this difference is between the original guy that came out that just handed off his estimate and walked away versus her. They told her, this private school person, that maintenance person, the facilities manager, they told her, you asked so many questions. You helped us understand that you knew what we were going through, what we needed to fix, and understood what the problem was, understood what the possible solutions were, and started to put together a solution for us. That's what they told her. And so what really comes down to is the original guy that came out didn't know if there was any pain or not. He just said, this is what you need. I see it. But they didn't know for sure. And they weren't comfortable with somebody that just didn't dig into it far enough. He didn't confirm a budget necessarily. It was tough to tell because he was kind of close to the budget, but he wasn't exactly where he should be. And whenever somebody just says, hey, just send it over, it's a lot of times a brush off. So they didn't say that to her. She asked, do you want me to go through this with you before I send this to you? That's her process. She doesn't just send it over. She sets up a meeting, she reviews it with them and lets them make a decision. And I think the key to this is that when they tell you what's at stake and if they don't solve the problem, that's a huge answer. When you know the budget and the timeline and the range and all that stuff fits, you know that's a good positive for you. It's a strike in the corner for you, right? And you know when you ask them, would you like me to put something together? And they say yes with some context of why, that's helpful. And when you've confirmed there's a decision-making path, you know what's happening next based on what they're doing and what you're doing. That's a huge deal too. I mean, you have to remember, proposals and presentations, they'll never close a deal. The conversations will close the deal. It's always about the conversations that you have. Before you build or do anything, ask yourself, what is the information that I do not know? Because once you've got pain, you got the budget, you got some decisions, only then is it right to start to make some solutions. So if you or your team is sending out proposals and not getting any response, it might be time to fix it. Or maybe not. Maybe it's not costing you anything to do that. Maybe that's not an issue for you. Regardless, you can contact us at questions@theslowpitch.com if you have any questions about how to fix your sales issues, especially if you might be presenting an estimate too soon or the wrong way. Remember, slow down and close more. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to The Slow Pitch. Do you have a question about sales? Call or text your question at 608-708-SLOW. That's 608-708-7569. Or you can email them to questions@theslowpitch.com. Slow down and close more.